Welcome to Brain Wellness, the podcast. I'm your host, Mandy NP. Each episode will bring you a new topic or interview related to brain health and wellness as part of my mission to help you on the path to a healthier, happier brain. So, let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Brain Wellness, the podcast. Today, we have my friend, Dr. Jesse Corry. Jesse is a neurologist with interest in consciousness and cognition. A childhood watching movies like The Empire Strikes Back and The Serpent and the Rainbow led to a fascination of how to start and stop consciousness. Jesse started his education at Lawrence University with a degree in biology. Medical school and residency were at the Medical College of Wisconsin. Fellowship was in neurocritical care at Washington State University in St. Louis. And Jesse has published on topics related to seizures, cerebral edema, and targeted temperature management. He's been an invited speaker at a number of regional and national conferences and currently is working at the Noran Neurological Clinic. Welcome, Jesse.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Great to be here.
So I always like to ask my first question, what is your story? Why does brain health interest you? How did you get into this?
Okay. It really, you hit it right there on the head with my introduction. I remember, oh God, I was like 5, 6 years old. Empire Strikes Back comes back, and I'm in the theaters with my dad, and everybody's thinking, oh, cool lightsabers and stuff. I thought Han Solo getting frozen in carbonite was the coolest thing in the world. And so I remember actually when I'm like, I knew that, well, baking soda and vinegar makes carbon dioxide. That's like carbonite, right? So I tried freezing my sister's goldfish in that stuff in the deep freeze. And to this day, I swear I got one of the fish to survive briefly afterwards. But to me, I thought that was the coolest thing. And so I started getting into, I went to med school, and then so I interested in basically looking at, how can you change consciousness? How can you, both physically, put the body in stasis, like you see in all the sci-fi movies and stuff, and so that's where I went into neurology and neurocritical care, and that's, as time went on, I remember when I started doing my first work with hypothermia, I was looking with its use in seizures, because I was thinking, well, if you can control the brain and it's most metabolically active, you could then use this for other things. And I found out that, while it's effective at controlling seizure activity, it may not be the best thing to reverse the outcome. The outcome a lot of times is still dependent upon what caused that person to seize in the first place. And so, as I've gotten older, I've kind of said, okay, well, maybe we're not quite ready for long haul, deep space voyages right now, with metabolic manipulation. What are other things we could do to change how we think, how the brain operates, and to, kind of, some people say reboot consciousness. And so this has kind of been things that I'm more interested in now, as I've gotten older. And full disclosure, I like Dan Carlin says with Hard History, I'm a huge fan of neurosciences right now, but I right now I have no skin in this game. I read this stuff for fun. I like to explain this stuff, and then my full-time job is taking care of the kids.
Very, very good. Very good. Well, and doing your martial arts.
Yeah.
So you had done a lecture for us a while ago on consciousness with martial arts as well.
Yeah.
So can you tell us more about that?
Sure. So, when it's backing up here, what makes the human brain special, and is it special? I think the first question is it special? I think it is, and you look at the models that are out there for how the brain, what consciousness is. And I think you first have to back off to say, okay, well, what is what you and I are doing right now? Well, there's the content of consciousness, and then there's the arousal, right? Okay, arousal is easy, reticular activating system goes up, goes to the thalamus and hypothalamus and shoots the rest of the brain. We're awake, right? Kind of an on-off switch. If you hit parts of in the brainstem, right? You hit that where that reticular activating system is deep in the pons, or you hit the thalamus is one or both just right, or you have bilateral brain injury, the on-off switch for the brain's off, right? And it takes time. So we have a better understanding of arousal than we do the content of consciousness. And we look at the content of consciousness. This is where you start having some, this is where I think that's what everybody's really interested in.
Mm-hmm.
You have, what they've called the hard and soft questions of consciousness. And I think this is where Harry Bergson, who was a philosopher turn of the century, 19th century, 20th century, he's got a series of books. I'm getting goosebumps right now. It's just fascinating stuff where he's talking about these very issues. How do I share with you that phenomena of consciousness? How do I share with you that snow outside is really cold? And how do I, yes, I can go ahead and I can put my hand there and the thermometers, my hands, drop and they send a signal back here. But how do I explain that to you? That's one of the problems with, how do we exchange, through this? So when you look at the models, there are dozens of models out there, and they all may be somewhat right, they all may be somewhat wrong. I think it was I can't remember who it says, but the old saying that all models are wrong, but some are useful, and this is kind of what I think with conscious models, that whether it's people who think, well, it's the claustrum and it's just the deep interconnection between the front brain, the back of the brain, and our default mode network's ability to to kind of focus on or off that is important. Or they say, well, no, it's not the claustrum, it's more of the paramedian nuclei in the hypothalamus. It's doing a similar thing. They all share a couple of key components. Number one, there has to be some clear connection with the arousal state, right? Two, that there's rich interconnections, right? Right side, left side. Three, that those connections are filtered in two ways. There's the pathways themselves, maybe preferentially chosen for this pathway, that pathway, and also that the amount of data, the brain can only use so much data at one time. So there are filters built in there, whether it's in the cortex or in the thalami, that allow for just the right amount of information to go forward and backward. And so when we look at models of consciousness, whether it's the effects of things like psilocybin and psychedelics, whether it's meditation, Zen states and stuff, these are all conditions whereby the normal, what we're doing right now, is slightly shifted to where either the person themselves, through breathing techniques and through focus techniques, select for certain pathways, for certain connections, or the substance like psilocybin affects the flow of information and dissolves many of those pathways that we have built up in ourselves. And so this then leads to a cacophony of different of issues. We are who we are because of our experiences. How do our experiences, both as an individual but also as a society, affect what we are right now? So there's those historical questions. There's of course the chemical questions, all the stuff on how this molecule works, where it works, that sort of stuff, right? There's the ethical concerns, and so topics like consciousness, I love them because they give you an opportunity to take people who've got lots of different backgrounds,
Mm-hmm.
and they're all going to have different perspectives on this topic, and you can get a really it's a fun way to describe the human condition.
Mm-hmm.
So getting over a little cold myself here, so
I know, I still have the stupid cough left over from mine. So
yeah.
very cool. So we can change our consciousness state on our own with meditation. How can that benefit a person or society by doing that?
Okay, Good question. So we look at what are effective means to, how do I say this? Let's take an example. Okay. We know that meditation states like mindfulness meditation, things of this nature here, where a person learns to focus more on the here and now, are very effective at reducing anxiety, right? And depending on who you read, as effective, more effective than drugs.
Mhm.
Well, imagine if you could teach people ways that they can in their everyday life breathe, focus to reduce those anxiety provoking triggers, right? You know, we've only over the last couple hundred years had this world where we have technology that allows us to talk over time and space like this, you know, where we have artificial light that's affecting our brain's ability to properly regulate day night. Normally, with this disruption of day night, you might very well be maybe running away from saber tigers, what have you, right? But you know, we live in an unnatural world right now.
Yeah.
So to have techniques that can help ground you into the natural world may improve that individual ability to be successful. What do I mean by that? You know, to live and prosper, you know, to basically go ahead and to reproduce and stuff. And so those beings that can, you know, use those techniques to calm themselves, become more productive, are going to be better members for society. So what do we mean better members for society? They're going to be able to kind of help, you know, raise their children, so the kids are good, that they've got good parents who, you know, love, care for them, that they're empathetic, that they are able to learn, to build, to create, to do things that we're meant to do as a society. So I think when we look at these very individualized techniques of, you know, meditation, breathing exercises, that sort of stuff, what we're doing is we're trying to build that person's resiliency in life, and that will then translate to them being a more successful member of their society, tribe, whatever you want to call it. And that, I think, makes for a society with better coping mechanisms, less violence, that sort of stuff. So a big believer in those things. When you look at the other things, right? A lot of when you look at things, let's say like practice like yoga or practice like martial arts, these share many of the same features of like a meditative state, right? Where you are focusing on one thing, you're learning the reaction, balance, counter reaction of these things. You're trying to analyze self, but it's a group setting, right? What better way to build social bonds, social groups, than by having a bunch of people together, focusing on a common goal, a common activity. And then, you know, to me, there's very few other ways to build better social bonds, better social networks, you know, than doing that. And I can speak from experience from, you know, I practice Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and, you know, we have people of all walks of life come, you know, in that gym. And I, you know, train everyone there, respect everyone there. And, you know, you want to talk about, you know, how to bring the world together. Bring the world together by learning how to choke each other. That's a great way to do it. So I think that when you look at the practice of, you know, be it meditation, martial arts, those things that help ground you into a more of a mindful state of here and now, it's going to result in more confidence, less anxiety, better social bonds. And I think that, you know, when I look at, you know, that aspect of consciousness, you know, these are things that I really find, you know, fascinating. Now what if we could somehow manifest for those who are sick? How to make this clinically relevant?
Yeah.
And that, I think, is a really fascinating idea. I want to say it was 2006. Adrian Owens, I want to say it was, or Adrian Owen, I want to say, did some of the first work using functional fMRI on people in minimally conscious states, states where they vegetative states. So what he did was he had a person, remember this term correctly, visualize themselves playing tennis. right?
Mm-hmm.
And so using the fMRI, which then watches brain activity by watching, the oxygen levels and hemoglobin move through the brain, he was able to see that this person, there was a person in there. There was somebody who was actually visualizing themselves playing tennis,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's kind of, this is fascinating, So lots of folks over the next couple of years started coming up with different ideas. And there was, I want to say it was Gregory Scott and Robin Carhart Harris, and I want to say it was Hader Koja. These are some of the bigger names in the consciousness field.
Mm-hmm.
And they had kind of brought the idea, well, what about if we could somehow reboot consciousness, right? And the thought was, well, would there be a way to essentially, if disorders of consciousness, being in a comatose state, vegetative state, are disorders where there's a loss of that content of consciousness, what if we could, kind of open the floodgates, so to say, and allow the brain to basically have more information at its disposal, so it could then kind of reawaken, rewire the content of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And so this then over the last several years, especially since psilocybin now has this kind of breakthrough approach with FDA, and you have centers in London, Johns Hopkins, where they have now institutes for psychedelic research, has really brought forth this idea of, okay, what if we can use these natural chemicals to go ahead and to reboot consciousness?
Yeah.
And what's fascinating and why I think it does closely mirror things with meditation and group martial arts practices, yoga, that sort of stuff. We all know there are people who've got bad trips. We all have that one goofy uncle who, did acid back in college and now schizophrenic. There are people who are sensitive, who are maybe they shouldn't do this as much. When they've looked at institutes like the Johns Hopkins Institute, and you look at places, there's some places in Tel Aviv that looking at using psilocybin for, for people with refractory depression and whatnot. Critical to all these is the environment.
Mm-hmm.
Having a place where that person who's about to undergo this transformation of their consciousness needs to feel confident and needs to have a good guide around them. And when you look at one of the commonalities of people who have bad trips, yes, baseline things like anxiety and whatnot do play a big role, but not having a good guide is important.
Mm-hmm.
You want that good guide. You want that shaman, that teacher, whomever.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at, people who have, who come through these with rich experiences where they say, I used this psilocybin technique and I'm no longer depressed, or I'm not smoking, I'm not doing alcohol anymore. They all, before they go into that state, they spend, days and weeks with the guides,
Mm-hmm.
getting to know them, explaining what their anxieties are, preparing themselves for this experience, right? And so when we looked at, we need to have good guides, good teachers,
Mm-hmm.
whether we call them shaman, what have you. And what's going to make then or break potentially use of psychedelics for people who have a disorder of consciousness. It's going to be that ability to make sure that person has somebody who can help them with that journey, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, how that is, that's the next big question. And there's Andrew Peterson, who wrote a great piece, I want to say 2020, 2019, where he's looking at, okay, what are the ethics of doing this? Let's say that this works, right? And this person wakes up.
Mm-hmm.
Well, first of all, what measure do we use? There are all kinds of measures. You can use fMRI, you can use EEG. But there's lots of evidence that's been done before, both in animals and humans, that says, when we're looking at these states with EEG, with magnetoencephalograms and whatnot, we may be measuring more brain activity, or we may just be measuring more chaos. Now, here I think you kind of walk back and say, okay, how do things like psychedelics and psilocybin and stuff work? So psychedelics work on mainly two receptors, serotonin 2A and S1R. Most of the work, I think, it comes with its effect on serotonin 2A. And what this is a receptor. It's mainly postsynaptic, but it affects how glutamate is released. You have increased glutamate release. And what it seems to have effect mainly at the frontal and parietal areas, that connection, but also kind of the connections with parts of the brain that deal with memory and deal with emotions. What's been found has been activating, this receptor with things like psilocybin. You notice a couple of things. Those neural networks, right? Those networks that we've developed over time immemorial to help with attention, with memory, they seem to dissolve, right? So so the brain now is less bound by its own, and you call it biases, just call it how we're wired. It's less of a filter there. There also seems to be less of a sensory filter in the thalamus. So the data going up there's more data, right? So the brain, they say that there's more entry, the brain's more complex. I think there's just more data. Yeah. And what's going on here is that there appears to be this more information. So that concept of, opening the floodgates up, allowing more information there so the brain can kind of, rewire its own conscious. There's some plausibility to that. There also is evidence that it improves synaptic plasticity, the ability to make connections. And this is actually some of the work that these folks have seen with depression, use this for refractory depression and addiction, is that it's been noticed that people seem to have differences in how those areas are connected. And so that's a possibility. We know that the part of the brain called the default mode network, which is the part of the brain that's active when we're thinking about ourselves, right? When you're thinking about how you're feeling right now, or conversely, the whole idea of Zen meditation, where you're actually visualizing yourself doing something, right? Sure. These are areas where the default mode network is very active. And it's been shown that people who have conditions of the content of consciousness, so people who've got Alzheimer's, depression, these all appear to have some kind of problem with the default mode network, be it where they have alteration in the sugar metabolism in the case of dementia, in the case of Alzheimer's, whether it's the connections, the number and the scope of connections between different parts of the brain are less than they should be. There appears to be all these problems with this default mode network. So if one can go ahead and potentially alter how this goes here, one could potentially then, yes, increase open the floodgates, increase the ability to perform new connections right there. We also know that inflammation plays a big role in things like Parkinson's and whatnot. And it's been shown that these serotonin receptors, they do influence the production of the chemicals that tell white blood cells, hey, come in here, the cytokines and chemokines. They affect the ability for those white blood cells to get into brain tissue through the little proteins on the cell wall, the ICAMs and the VCAMs that allow these cells to kind of, white blood cells to kind of lock on into the blood vessel wall and go into the tissue. We could, there's a number of ways potentially, I'm not sure which is the important ones, that the brain could then, with these certain chemicals, change the ability, the amount of data there to take in, and then change the how the connections are had. And then, so basically, there is a plausible hypothesis that, yeah, you could very easily affect the brain's ability to rewire, and then this goes down to whole, fascinating, things about, other things, but I feel like I'm monopolizing things here.
No,
So,
you're good. You're good. So, quick question on that. So when you're talking about using psychedelics to get to
yeah.
those points, when people do it on their own without a guide, is it probably different dosing that they're doing than if they're working with a guide?
Yeah. So
Okay.
when you look at, when you're looking at what people are typically doing when they're doing it for, there's like microdosing,
Yeah.
right? Which you hear about all the time and stuff, So basically, people using the micros, they're using a lower dose in the hopes of some people to reduce anxiety, some people to improve creativity. Then there's the kind of the more the middle dose where they're trying to, let's say, to really improve what they're experiencing. And so you look at some of the I forget his name right now. The gentleman who developed the PCR spoke about how it was under psychedelics that he was able to kind of see this stuff and go forth and develop this technology. Then you have the more recreational doses where people are using these heroic doses, and they're Homer Simpson on the in the golf course where he's got the coyote talking to him in the voice of Johnny Cash, So, so really, there's and what's interesting is that you look at the effects of psilocybin in particular. It seems that at higher doses, you don't have as much neuroplasticity as you do at lower doses. Lower doses seem to be more for the neuroplasticity thing. And so that, so the dosage is going to be important. So if you're looking for an effect on how would we go ahead and rewire the brain, we in theory we want to do it at a lower dose, because that seems to be where the neuroplasticity is getting better at. And so so a lot of right now, again, this is all at the discussion stage, is if there were to be a trial using psilocybin to go forth and try to rewire the brain, it'd be more of a dose finding study. So you would go ahead and you start at lower is what we use right now for what's the microdosing that people typically use these days, and you start to then measure with whether it's EEG, MEG, whether it's functional MRI. You'd watch the brain response going forward. This brings me to an interesting question, though. Okay, why the focus on psilocybin? Why the focus on this? Okay, and this again comes down to fascinating discussions on both chemistry and ethnobiology. Okay, so psilocybin, first of all, it's found in, I think, over 200 varieties of fungus. It's on every continent outside of Antarctica, and every continent has a group of people there who have some sort of religion or some sort of practice where they there's incorporation of some of these psychedelics involved in some way, shape, or form. Psilocybin is bioavailable from ingestion, right? There doesn't be any kind of preparations. It's things like ayahuasca and stuff. You have to typically do. There's a little more of a process involved with that. Psilocybin you can take right away, and psilocybin, the mushrooms that where they find the biggest concentrations of these grow very well in the feces of the ungulates, or the animals that were being hunted by primitive man. We see they've done some studies where they looked at the dental enamel of primitive hominids, and they find that since the Pliocene, that humans have been ingesting these compounds. Now think about this then. So you're Throg, you're a caveman out there, and you're hungry, and you grab some mushrooms and you have a spell, right? And you realize it's kind of cool. I saw some things here, but definitely unsafe, because as I'm acting, kind of foolish, there could be a big cat out there that's about to eat me. Well, okay. So maybe you get some more of your friends here. You have, one of your friends here kind of watch out, and make sure everybody's okay. And you take smaller doses and stuff. And so you look at, like, there've been, what's evidence is there for this kind of, hypothesis? There are cave paintings in Spain and Portugal where they show people, using psychedelic mushrooms and doing just exactly that, basically, where they've had, a group practice where somebody's watching out, these folks are going here. And so one can make an argument that basically the use of these kind of compounds push forth proto-religion, artistic expression, communication, developing a language so that you can be safe from other people is important. And it helped accelerate social dynamics, social bonds, right? Made us, the people we are today, people who need to have, other folks we work with, people need people, so you can see this stuff. And so it would then make sense that, well, a compound that is readily available in nature that may have helped influence human culture and society, if it does have an effect, this may be the way to go forth. And we do see, in fact, that in vivo and vitro, there are changes that happen to the brain itself that, are the result of exposure to this chemical. So, when we look at, well, if we're trying to using, psychedelics for disorders of consciousness, disorders of cognition, what would our choices be? And I think, honestly, one of the easy choices right here would be, let's go what was been here since time immemorial, psilocybin.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool. What got you interested in that, in this particular part of it?
Again, misspent childhood, Serpent in the Rainbow. I love that story. Who doesn't love zombies? I remember watching that movie and I thought, good golly, could you use, a toxin, the Xanax, I'm like, 18 years old, I'm not sure how this stuff works, but I thought it was the coolest thing. You give somebody, you put them under a box, they're under the ground, sincerely no oxygen for hours. They come out and they're still alive. Maybe not the way you want to be alive, but they're still alive. Right. So I thought that this is, the idea of using chemistry to change who we are, to me, is a fascinating thing. So yeah. When I started seeing that hypothermia and manipulation of metabolism is maybe not the best way to change how we think, I then started kind of going on the rabbit hole of, okay, well, what is things? Because, honestly, things like hypothermia, you're dealing more with that first problem, that the awareness arousal problem of consciousness. You're not really dealing with the cognitive consciousness. And so I started kind of going down more of that route. And, it's, from just a, brain candy standpoint, the thoughts of, how people can say, well, our brain is actually a quantum computer. Our brain is a connection of these different things here. Or that maybe all things have to get that some level of consciousness. Consciousness is something that's throughout the entire universe and stuff, and it's just when it's put together in certain patterns that we experience consciousness like we have right here. This to me was just fascinating. And so one of the things I, thought about, well, is there something that's ubiquitous to human society that, that could explain for some of this stuff? And psychedelic mushrooms are one of those things. There's actually, and it's not I haven't read them yet in my book list, but there's a number of ethnobotanists and researchers who are investigating, was early Christianity, was it more fertility cults? And so there's these linguists who've gone through and they've actually translated different primitive texts and stuff and trying to look for source material and see, well, were early monotheistic practices based upon fertility cults, and were mushrooms in some way, shape, or form, intrinsic to that. So I haven't read the book yet, but that it's a fascinating concept, and then there's also these beliefs that that many early rituals in early ancient societies dealt with consumption of psychedelics in a group setting and stuff, so there's I think the idea of looking at is there something that may influence us that's has low toxicity, that's doesn't have much addiction, that to me is a fascinating concept. Again, yeah, there's clinical applications there if we can do it right. Just lots of questions, what doing it right means. But I think also just the discussion to get a better idea of who we are as a species, who we are as a people. It's a fascinating way to get into that niche.
Yeah, yeah. So of all the things we've talked about, the hypothermia is one thing that we can use in the hospital.
Mhm.
Are you able to bring any of these other thoughts on consciousness to your everyday practice?
Okay. I think, yeah, I think that where it really helps is in those topics dealing with meditation and mindfulness.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So when I have patients nowadays, who come in, things that are very common. People have, after they had stroke and brain injury, there's problems with memory, problems with anxiety, depression. So, the literature so far, it's kind of muddled as far as, when to and if to use antidepressants, SRIs for
Mm-hmm.
um, early post-stroke depression and this, that. And so when I look at, okay, what can I do in daily practice, first do no harm.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that helping people learn techniques to kind of help, what we're going to call it, self-soothe, or basically to help themselves, lessen anxiety, lessen depression, are useful.
Mm-hmm.
So, whereas, I'd love to be able to go and do meditative journeys in my clinic practice, unfortunately, the rules of Medicare, Medicaid, and, basically performing a living preclude that. So, but no, I mean, we're seeing is increasing, like Penny George's do. You see increasing number of places where we can refer patients out to so they can do more wellness therapy.
Yeah.
And so I think that the first thing is, if we can teach people techniques to help improve their content and consciousness, that is something that's going to translate into them having, less anxiety, less depression.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Memory, there doesn't seem to be a lot of evidence right now that meditation improves memory.
Mm-hmm.
But if people conceivably have less anxiety, you can teach them workarounds
Mm-hmm.
for things like that. There is work right now being done looking at the use of psilocybins early on, early dementia or early diagnosis of dementia.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I know there's the Johns Hopkins Institute has an arm there. I'm not sure if it's locally, but there is some work being done early on right now with people who have very early Alzheimer's, initiating these, psilocybin to see if we can reverse or delay that progression.
Very cool.
So that's another kind of clinical that goes beyond just the wellness stuff. And so, and there's also evidence right now using things like wellness, mindfulness meditation,
Mm-hmm.
to help improve pain control and to help people who have chronic pain issues learn to kind of help control that pain.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, pain is, it's really, it's a twofer. It's, you have the nociception, or the sensation of pain, and the interpretation of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so you could affect a person's response based upon either leg of that problem. So it's, we have an opiate epidemic in this country.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can find out, for each individual person, what is the cause of their pain? Is it more of the interpretation? Is it more there's something physical there? We can hopefully reduce that dependency on opiates and whatnot. I think for a number of people, the problem with pain, whether they're using fentanyl, whether they're using, oxycodone, what have you, it has less to do with the actual nociception, the actual pain. It's the interpretation of it, whether it's from, personal depression, anxiety, what have you. There's something else going on here. And I think that we don't spend enough time focusing on these less invasive ways. And we really should.
Yeah, agreed. Absolutely. Yeah. So shifting gears a little bit, and I want to be respectful of your time. I have a couple other questions I like to ask people just to kind of, this is all fascinating. I'm sure we could go on for hours on it because I could pick your brain forever. But what kind of things do you do, again, shifting gears, what kind of things do you do to improve your own brain health?
Okay. So one of the things I do is try to stay as active as possible. And so for me, I can tell you if I don't get an hour and a half a day of physical activity, and I start getting crazy. So I try to do jiu-jitsu at least 5 to 6 days a week. Doing also, running, jogging, that kind of zone 2 kind of activity, first of all, that I feel has great benefits on my overall just anxiety hyperactivity level. And also, lifting weights and, resistance training, I think they're all important things, so the body needs to we're basically big monkeys. We need to stretch, we need to pull on things, and we need to have short bursts of running and stuff. You look at things like it's actually been narrowed down to averaging about 10 minutes of getting your heart rate up to that 80% and above range does have great benefits, and it's called brain derived neurocritical factor, basically your brain's ability to improve connections. So you can do this with yourself just by physical activity. You can do this with psilocybin. It's one of the things that psilocybin does. It can naturally increase this compound. So that's one thing that I do is maintain physical activity. The other thing is maintain mental activity. And so things like this, reading books, art, learning something new, these are all things that help keep your brain active. Social interactions, I mean, especially, I think everyone was red pilled the last 3 years. We need social connections. It's not enough to do something in Zoom. You need to have that to be able to read people's body language and stuff. That's important. So those are things you can do. As far as diet and exercise, this is, again, we can go down the rabbit hole on this one, the whole gut microbiome and its effects of mental health. I'm a huge believer that what we eat is, makes us, who we are and stuff, And I don't know if you ever read the Pottinger's Cats. This is like, it's an old, gosh, I want to say this guy's 1800s. Basically, he fed cats progressively less protein-based diets, right? And so what ended up happening was you had the first generation of cats where, they're typical cats and stuff, and by the time you're 3-4 generations down here eating these refined processed foods, you had more anxious cats, less sexual dimorphism, and basically if you're a conspiracy theorist and you think, well, gosh, has the overcarbing of America resulted in our current state of affairs here? You can make an argument for that. So I think that, having a diet where you have, good fermented foods, kimchi, kefir, where you have a good balance of, pre and probiotic specials and stuff, I think that's hugely important. It's easy to say, I'll eat your 5 vegetables a day and good lean meats and stuff, not always practical. I myself, found, I started try that AG1. And it is, I mean, I know I'll have that with some matcha, so basically green tea powder in the morning. And I feel engaged, happy, relaxed. And yeah, I think that's good. Also, intermittent fasting. I think intermittent fasting's, more and more we're learning that things like Alzheimer's is type 3 diabetes. It's a matter of how we're not properly metabolizing things. And so, yeah. So if you can keep your windows of eating down to 6 to 8 hours, all the better. So I think those are the things that I find that I do that's really good. Meditation, whether you go more the Eastern route or, Christian religion has, a long meditative history to it as well. And so I think getting that me time, so to say, is hugely important for a person's overall mental health.
Agreed. Yeah. All good things. And any other, so those are kind of translate out to tips that you would probably recommend to other people as well.
Yeah. So I'd say, if the person's looking for, especially now we're at the New Year's time of year, say, hey, I think persons were to spend, a couple times a week, doing more physical activity, practicing, some sort of meditative practice and, changing the diet around, there's little things, you know.
Yeah.
I'll give you an easy example here. Kefir, which we love, but we make our own in our house here. You know, it's basically it's somewhere between the consistency of like milk and yogurt, right? So it's very thin, rich in you know, pre and probiotics and whatnot. You like a salad with your meal? Throw that with a little bit of balsamic vinegar in there. You got a cream balsamic. You're now going to improve your gut microbiome, and it's a good tasting thing. You know, add that a couple times a week, and you know, maybe try a little bit more kimchi in the diet or something, or naturally fermented kraut or naturally fermented pickles. These are all very simple things you can do to your diet that may have, you know, good effects for you.
It's supposed to be really good for the gut to have something fermented every day.
Yep.
So,
yep.
Very, very good. Awesome. Again, trying to be respectful of your time. Any last little things you wanted to add or before we close up here?
You know, you know, what I think is that, you know, the human condition is absolutely fascinating, you know, and it's just, you know, how, you know, one little thing like, you know, this caveman accidentally eats a mushroom here, how it could have a, you know, the butterfly effect and stuff, you know. So I think, you know, what's important is for people to, you know, if there's one theme, I'd say from, you know, what we saw, well, here's that, you know, don't put too many filters on your information, right? You know, go ahead, engage, you know, learn about the world, and it's going to have great effects. I mean, I personally, I think that, you know, people say, you know, I'm Roman Catholic, right? I believe that science is the language of God, right? And so I can, you know, walk in this world and very comfortably believing in God and also believing in science. And I think that as a society, we're getting too pigeonholed to this is the way, this is the whatever. And I think that's not healthy. I think we have to be more childlike and just look at things with, you know, open eyes.
Explore, be open to new things.
Yep.
Which is also good for the brain. So
absolutely.
Yeah, very good. Where can people find you if they want to learn more about what you're working on with all of these?
Well, right now, if you want to see me for healthcare issues, you can go to Noran Clinic. I'm working out of Lakeville and Lake Elmo predominantly. If they want to find out about other things, I've got my LinkedIn profile. I'm at Doc Neuron on LinkedIn. They can find me there. Be more than happy to, you know, to discuss things that would have you there. And yeah, it's probably the easiest way to get a hold of me.
Very good. Very good. Thank you so much for your time today, Jesse.
Oh,
I've learned something. I learned something new every episode, and I absolutely love it. So, very cool. Thank you so much, and we will talk to you soon.
Excellent.
Bye for now.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Brain Wellness, the podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, I encourage you to subscribe, like, and share this with others to help me continue on with my mission to help people live healthier, happier lives. Go to www.brainwellnesssolutions.com to see what I'm up to and get links to all the social medias there. See you next time.